Hello there, and welcome to Drowsy Discoveries. Tonight, we'll be drifting somewhere far north, somewhere quiet, beneath a sky lit by something older than memory, where colored light moves without sound, where particles born on the sun travel for days through empty space just to arrive here, above the snow, and dance. This is not just light in the sky, it is a slow, drifting conversation between our small, quiet planet and the restless sun, 93 million miles away. Green ribbons unfurl like silk pulled gently through the dark. Soft edges of rose and violet fold in and fade, moving only in the rhythm of the wind they cannot feel. Close your eyes and imagine standing somewhere very cold, very still, just your breath rising in pale clouds and the hush of snow beneath your feet. Above you, the world disappears into something vast and silent. No traffic, no voices, just the slow, patient breathing of light far overhead. Some of these lights left the sun before this evening even began, traveling quietly across the void, just to reach you now at exactly this moment. There is something deeply peaceful about a light that takes its time. But for now, there's nothing you need to do but relax. Allow yourself to get comfortable. Allow your mind to settle. And as the day begins to gently fade away, join me as we drift, slowly, beneath the shifting color into a world of stillness far above. If you enjoy these journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, and drop a thought below. Let's begin. High above the Arctic Circle, there is a kind of light that does not come from the sun or the moon or any star we can name. It comes from something far stranger. Far above the clouds, charged particles drift in from the sun on a slow solar wind, traveling for days across the emptiness of space. And when they finally reach our planet, they are pulled gently toward the poles by the invisible hands of Earth's magnetic field. There, high in the thin air, they collide with atoms of oxygen and nitrogen, and in that collision, light is born. Not light like a lamp or a flame, but a soft, drifting glow that seems to breathe across the sky. The ancient people who watched these lights had no science to explain them. So they imagined spirits, dancing ancestors, the footsteps of foxes running across snowy hills and flicking sparks into the heavens with their tails. Tonight, you don't need to understand the physics. You only need to imagine standing somewhere very cold, very quiet, your breath rising in pale clouds, and above you, a slow green ribbon unfurling like silk, pulled gently through the dark. The colors of the aurora are not random. They are a quiet signature of altitude. When the colliding particles strike oxygen atoms very high in the atmosphere, around 180 miles up, they produce a faint, rare red, the kind that early witnesses sometimes mistook for distant fires or even omens of war. Lower down, around 60 miles above the Earth, oxygen gives off the soft green that most people picture when they think of the aurora, that gentle, watery green, like moonlight, filtered through sea glass. And nitrogen, when struck at the lowest altitudes, can produce hints of blue and a deep, soft purple, fringing the edges of the green like a watercolor bleeding into the page. So really what you are seeing, when you look up at the lights, is a kind of map written in color, telling you exactly how high in the sky each photon was born. Some nights only one color shows itself. Other nights, all of them blend together into something the eye can barely process, a shifting curtain of pale fire. You don't have to remember any of this. Just let the colors move behind your closed eyes, green fading to rose, fading to soft and quiet blue. It can take the solar wind anywhere from 1 to 3 days to travel from the sun to the earth, which means that the lights dancing over the Arctic tonight may have begun their journey before you even thought to look up. Picture that for a moment, a burst of energy leaving the surface of the sun 93 million miles away, drifting silently through the vacuum of space, past nothing, past silence, past the kind of emptiness that swallows sound entirely, until, days later, it brushes against the edge of our atmosphere like a wave finally reaching the shore after crossing an entire ocean. There is something comforting in that thought, that the beauty above you took time to arrive, that it is not instant, not rushed. It had to travel patiently, the way a letter might travel for days before reaching the one it was written for. So when the sky shimmers tonight, you are watching something that left its origin long before this evening began. A slow gift, sent across the solar system, finally unwrapped above your head. The Northern Lights have a southern twin called the Aurora Australis, which dances over Antarctica in much the same way. Both occur for the very same reason, charged particles meeting our magnetic field near the poles. Yet very few people will ever see the southern version simply because there is so little land beneath it. No quiet villages, no frosted windows, no one lying in the grass to watch it unfold. It glimmers, mostly, over icebound research stations and empty stretches of frozen ocean, an entire light show performed for almost no one. Isn't that a strange and gentle thought? That somewhere on Earth right now, brilliant curtains of light may be folding and unfolding across the sky, with no one there to see them. Beauty doesn't need an audience to exist. It simply happens, quietly, whether or not someone is watching. Perhaps that is worth remembering as you drift towards sleep tonight. That wonder continues on its own, even in rooms with the lights turned off, even in skies with no one beneath them. Earth's magnetic field, the very thing that pulls these particles toward the poles and lets us witness the aurora at all, is generated deep within the planet, in a churning ocean of liquid iron more than 1,800 miles beneath your feet. This molten metal swirls and shifts with the slow turning of the Earth, creating something like a vast, invisible bubble that wraps around the entire planet. A magnetic shield, quietly deflecting the harsher parts of the solar wind that would otherwise strip away our atmosphere entirely. Without it, scientists believe, our planet might look very different, more like Mars, a thin, scoured world with little air left to breathe. So, in a way, the gentle light above the Arctic tonight is a kind of visible proof that something is protecting us far below in the dark and the heat and the pressure, a slow, molten heart, turning quietly so that we might live here at all. It is strange to think that the thing keeping you safe is something you will never see, something working in total silence every hour, every night, while you sleep undisturbed above it. Indigenous Arctic peoples have watched these lights for thousands of years, long before anyone wrote the word aurora. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia called them govsahas, a word tied closely to the soft light just before dawn, and many believed the lights deserved a quiet kind of respect. Some elders advised against whistling at them, fearing the lights might come closer, might notice you, might reach down. In parts of Alaska, some Inuit communities believed the aurora was the spirits of the dead, playing a game with a walrus skull beneath the sky, their laughter and movement causing the lights to ripple and shift. Other stories speak of the lights as a bridge, a shimmering path connecting our world to the one beyond it. None of these stories needed instruments or satellites to feel true. They were built instead from nights and nights of looking up, generation after generation, each one passing down its quiet sense of wonder to the next. Tonight, as the lights drift somewhere far above the clouds, you are joining an unbroken line of people stretching back centuries who have done exactly what you are doing now, simply watching, simply listening, simply letting the sky hold their attention for a little while longer. The aurora is not always green. In fact, before the modern age of artificial light, witnesses across history sometimes described it appearing deep red, the color of dying embers stretched across the horizon. In the year 1659, a vivid red aurora was seen across much of Europe, and many people who saw it believed they were witnessing a sign from the heavens, a warning of war or disaster. A red aurora over London in 1716 was so widely seen and so widely feared that the astronomer Edmund Halley wrote an entire scientific paper simply trying to calm the public, to explain that what they had seen was natural, not supernatural. Imagine living in a world without forecasts or explanations, where a strange light in the sky could be your only news of what the universe might be planning for you. There was no comfort to be found in instruments back then, only the quiet decision to either be afraid or to simply watch and wonder and let the color fade in its own time, the way you might watch any other strange and beautiful thing pass slowly out of view. Auroras are not unique to Earth. Jupiter has them too, far larger and far more powerful than anything our planet can produce. Jupiter's aurora, captured by space telescopes, can stretch across distances larger than the entire surface of our planet, fueled not just by the solar wind, but by volcanic material ejected from one of its moons, Io, which spews sulfur particles into space that get caught in Jupiter's enormous magnetic field. Saturn has auroras too, glowing faintly at its poles, visible in ultraviolet light that human eyes could never detect unaided. Even Mars, with its thin and broken magnetic field, occasionally produces faint, patchy auroras in places where small pockets of magnetism remain. So this experience, this gentle curtain of light bending across a cold sky, is something happening quietly all across our solar system, on planets you will never visit, under skies no human has ever stood beneath. There is something soothing in that scale, that this small private moment of watching lights above a snowy field connects, in its own quiet way, to enormous, distant worlds spinning silently through the dark. The best places to view the northern lights sit within what scientists call the auroral oval, a band that circles the Earth roughly between 65 and 72 degrees north latitude. This includes northern Norway, Iceland, parts of Canada and Alaska, and the far north of Russia and Finland. Within this band, on a clear, dark night, away from the glow of cities, the lights can sometimes seem to fill the entire sky, curtains of pale green stretching from horizon to horizon, slowly twisting like fabric caught in a gentle wind no one can feel. People travel from all over the world enduring freezing temperatures, waiting for hours in the cold and the dark, simply for the chance that the sky might decide to perform. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the clouds stay thick, or the solar activity is too weak, and the watchers go home with nothing but the cold itself to remember. But that uncertainty seems to be part of what makes it precious. Nothing is promised. The lights come when they come, on their own schedule, indifferent to anyone's plans or hopes, and all you can really do is wait patiently, the way you might wait for sleep to finally arrive on a long, quiet night. There is a rhythm to when the aurora is more likely to appear, tied to something called the solar cycle, an 11-year pattern in which the sun's activity rises and falls. During what is called solar maximum, sunspots increase, solar flares grow more frequent, and the aurora becomes more vivid and more widespread, sometimes visible even at lower latitudes where it almost never appears. During solar minimum, the sun grows quieter and the lights retreat back toward the poles, fainter, more elusive. The sun, despite seeming so constant and unchanging from here on Earth, is actually breathing in its own slow way, swelling with activity and settling again over and over for as long as it has existed. We rarely think of the sun as something with a pulse. We think of it as fixed, reliable, simply there. But it moves through its own quiet seasons, just as the Earth does, just as we do. And the aurora, in its own gentle way, is one of the few signs we can see from the ground that the sun, 93 million miles away, is not as still as it appears. In rare moments of extreme solar activity, the aurora has been seen far outside its usual range, even reaching the tropics. During the Carrington event of 1859, one of the most powerful solar storms ever recorded, the northern lights were reportedly visible as far south as the Caribbean, with witnesses in Cuba and Hawaii describing skies glowing faintly red and green. Telegraph operators across North America and Europe found their equipment surging with electrical current generated by the storm, some machines sparking, some catching fire, some continuing to send messages even after being disconnected from their power sources. It is a strange thought that the same shimmering lights people now travel across the world to see peacefully from a snowy hillside once disrupted entire communication networks, frightened operators, and lit up skies where the aurora had never been seen before or since. The sky, it seems, occasionally reminds us of just how connected we are to events happening far beyond our control. A storm born on the sun, reaching across the void, touching wires and machines and rooftops thousands of miles below. And yet, for most people that night, it would have simply looked like an unusually beautiful evening, the heavens glowing softly for reasons no one yet understood. The aurora makes almost no sound that the human ear can typically detect, and yet for centuries witnesses in the far north have described hearing faint, crackling, hissing, or clapping noises during particularly active displays. For a long time, scientists dismissed these reports as imagination, insisting that sound could not travel from such great heights down to the ground in any meaningful way. But more recent research conducted in Finland recorded faint claps and crackles using sensitive microphones placed close to the ground, suggesting the sound may originate not from the aurora itself, high above, but from a kind of static discharge much closer to the Earth's surface, triggered by the same electromagnetic changes that create the lights. So perhaps both the skeptics and the storytellers were a little bit right. The sound is real, faint, and rare as it is, but it isn't quite coming from where everyone assumed. It is a reminder that the natural world still holds small mysteries, things people have quietly insisted upon for generations, long before anyone had the tools to measure them. Imagine standing in the cold and the dark, watching green light ripple above you and hearing, just faintly, the smallest whisper of a crackle, as though the sky itself was settling in for the night, the way an old house gently creaks once the lights go out. Auroras don't just appear briefly and vanish. A single display can last anywhere from a few minutes to several hours, slowly shifting in shape and intensity the entire time. Scientists describe a typical aurora as going through phases, beginning as a faint, still arc low on the horizon, almost easy to miss. Then, if conditions allow, it can erupt into what is called a substorm, where the lights suddenly brighten, ripple, and begin moving rapidly across the sky, folding into curtains, spirals, and pulsing waves of color that can shift every few seconds. This active phase might last 20 minutes to an hour before the display calms again, fading back into a soft, diffuse glow that can linger quietly for the rest of the night. It is not unlike the rhythm of a long, deep sleep, periods of stillness followed by sudden bursts of activity, followed by a slow settling back into quiet. If you ever do see the lights in person, the patient watchers will tell you the same thing, that the waiting itself becomes part of the experience, the long, cold stillness before the sky finally decides to move. Photographing the northern lights is notoriously difficult for the human eye to fully appreciate in real time, because cameras, especially with long exposures, can capture far more vivid color than what we actually perceive standing beneath them. A camera left open for several seconds gathers far more light than our eyes can in that same span, which means the brilliant magentas and deep purples seen in photographs are often more saturated than what the photographer themselves witnessed that night. To the naked eye, a faint aurora might appear as little more than a pale greyish-green smudge, easy to mistake for a wisp of cloud, until your eyes adjust fully to the darkness and the shapes begin to reveal themselves more clearly. This doesn't make the experience any less remarkable. If anything, there is something quietly moving about a phenomenon that reveals itself slowly, that asks for patience and adjusted eyes rather than offering its full beauty all at once. Some of the most meaningful things in life work the same way. They don't announce themselves instantly. They simply wait for us to grow still enough and patient enough to finally see them clearly. The word Aurora Borealis was first used in the early 1600s, combining Aurora, the Roman goddess of dawn, with Boreas, the Greek god of the north wind. So, in its very name, the phenomenon carries two old and gentle ideas at once: the soft arrival of morning light and the cold breath of the north. Galileo Galilei is sometimes credited with coining the term, though he likely observed a much rarer, lower latitude aurora himself and mistook the glowing tops of the lights for an early sunrise reflecting off the upper atmosphere. There is something fitting about the name surviving for over 400 years, even as our understanding of what causes the lights has changed entirely. We no longer think of it as sunrise reflected off clouds or the breath of a wind god sweeping color across the sky. And yet the name remains soft and poetic, carried forward through centuries of telescopes and satellites and solar wind measurements. Sometimes the old names are simply too beautiful to replace, even once the science behind them has moved on entirely. Beneath the swirling colours of the aurora lies something almost meditative in its scale. The lights typically form in a layer of atmosphere between 60 and 200 miles above the Earth's surface, an area so thin and so high that it exists in what is essentially the edge of space itself. The International Space Station orbits at roughly 250 miles up, meaning astronauts aboard the station sometimes find themselves looking down at the aurora, watching it ripple beneath them like a glowing river, instead of looking up at it from the ground. Photographs taken from orbit show the aurora forming a kind of glowing halo wrapped gently around the curve of the Earth, a soft green ring resting against the blackness of space. It is a strange shift in perspective to imagine that the same lights we crane our necks upward to see from frozen hillsides are, for a handful of astronauts at any given moment, simply something to glance down at, drifting quietly far below their floating boots. Wonder, it seems, depends entirely on where you happen to be standing, or floating, when you choose to look. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections, the violent eruptions on the sun's surface that often trigger the most intense auroras, can release as much energy in a matter of minutes as billions of hydrogen bombs detonating all at once. And yet, by the time that energy reaches Earth, after traveling millions of miles through the emptiness of space, what we experience is nothing violent at all, only a slow, gentle shifting of color in the night sky, soft enough to fall asleep beneath. There is something quietly comforting in that transformation, an event of almost unimaginable power, born in violence and heat, beyond anything we could survive, arriving here, transformed into something so calm, so soft, so safe to simply lie back and watch. Perhaps it is a reminder that distance and time can soften even the most overwhelming things, that something chaotic and enormous, given enough space to travel, enough time to settle, can become something gentle enough to comfort us, instead of frightening us. Norway's Tromsø, a small city sitting comfortably within the Arctic Circle, has built much of its quiet identity around the aurora, with locals casually checking aurora forecasts the way other places check the weather for rain. During the long, dark winter months when the sun may not rise at all for weeks at a time, a period locals call the polar night, the extended darkness actually makes for some of the best viewing conditions of the entire year. Residents speak of stepping outside in the deep cold, sometimes still in their pajamas, simply because a neighbor texted that the lights were active, gathering quietly in their yards or on quiet balconies, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky shift colors before returning, just as quietly, back to bed. There is a gentle kind of routine in that, treating something so extraordinary as simply part of an ordinary winter evening, stepping outside for a few minutes, watching the sky breathe, and then returning to the warmth, the way you might step outside briefly to check on a quiet snowfall before closing the door again. Long before satellites and solar wind monitors, sailors traveling near the Arctic used the aurora as an informal compass and weather sign, believing that certain colors and movements could hint at coming storms or shifts in temperature. Norwegian fishermen sometimes referred to particularly active auroras as a sign that fish would be more plentiful the following day, tying the lights gently into the practical rhythms of daily survival rather than treating them as separate or mystical. In Finland, some old folklore describes the aurora as light reflecting off the fur of a magical fox running so quickly across the snow that its tail sent sparks flying up into the night sky, giving the lights their Finnish name, revontule, meaning foxfires. It is a soft, almost playful image to hold on to as you drift towards sleep. A fox, swift and silent, running endlessly across some unseen frozen field far to the north, leaving trails of light behind it simply because it is moving too quickly for the sparks to settle. Researchers studying auroras rely on something called the KP index, a simple scale from 0 to 9 that measures geomagnetic activity and helps predict how far south the lights might be visible on any given night. A KP of 2 or 3 usually means the aurora stays close to the poles, visible only in the far north, but a KP of 7, 8 or 9, achieved only during major solar storms, can push the lights as far south as the northern United States, or even further, briefly turning ordinary skies into something almost unrecognizable. Aurora chasers, the dedicated few who track these numbers obsessively, often describe a particular kind of quiet anticipation that builds in the hours before a predicted display. Checking forecasts, watching the clock, glancing nervously at cloud cover reports, hoping for one clear patch of sky at just the right moment. There is something soothing, even in that anxious waiting, about devoting so much patient attention to something so far beyond anyone's control. No amount of hoping changes the solar wind. All you can do is wait and watch and let the sky decide for itself when it's ready. The Earth's magnetic poles are not fixed in place. They drift slowly over time, and this slow drift means the auroral oval itself is gradually shifting too, ever so slightly, year by year. The magnetic North Pole has been moving steadily away from Canada and towards Siberia over the past century, a journey that has actually accelerated in recent decades for reasons scientists are still studying closely. This means the places best suited for viewing the aurora today may not be exactly the same as they were 100 years ago, or exactly the same as they will be 100 years from now. Even something as seemingly eternal and unchanging as the spot on Earth where the lights gather most reliably is, in its own slow and patient way, still moving. It is a gentle reminder that almost nothing stays perfectly still, not even the things we think of as fixed points. The world simply drifts quietly, a little at a time, the way thoughts drift gently while falling asleep, shifting without ever quite announcing that they're moving at all. Among the rarer forms the aurora can take is something photographers and scientists have nicknamed STEVE, short for Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement, a thin ribbon of mauve or pale purple light that stretches across the sky in a straight line, distinct from the more familiar curtains and waves of a typical aurora. For years, STEVE was dismissed by scientists as a kind of proton arc, a lesser-known atmospheric phenomenon, until amateur photographers in Canada began capturing it so frequently and so clearly that researchers took a closer look and realized it was something entirely new, a phenomenon not fully explained by traditional aurora science at all. It is a quiet kind of victory for curiosity, that something so rare and strange could go almost unnoticed by official science for so long, simply because the people equipped to study it weren't the ones spending their cold nights outside looking up, simply because they loved to look. Sometimes the most careful observers of the world are not the experts with the instruments, but the patient ones with nothing more than a camera, a coat, and the willingness to stay outside a little longer than anyone else. The Northern Lights have occasionally appeared during significant moments in history, lending themselves to legend simply through timing alone. A vivid aurora was reportedly seen over the battlefield the night before the Battle of Fredericksburg during the American Civil War in 1862, with soldiers on both sides pausing to watch the unusual red and green light stretching across the sky, some interpreting it as an omen, others simply as a strange and beautiful distraction from the exhaustion of war. There is something quietly humbling in imagining that scene. Thousands of frightened, weary people on opposite sides of a brutal conflict, all looking upward at the very same sky, witnessing the very same lights, if only for a few minutes. The aurora does not choose sides, does not consider the wars or worries happening beneath it. It simply continues on its own slow, indifferent schedule, offering the same quiet beauty to everyone willing to look up, regardless of who they are or what they are facing that particular night. Some of the clearest, most consistent auroral displays in the world occur not directly at the magnetic pole, but in a ring around it, roughly 15 to 25 degrees away, an area scientists call the auroral zone. This is part of why places like Fairbanks, Alaska, or Yellowknife in northern Canada, rather than locations even further north, often report some of the most frequent and reliable sightings. Travel too far north, closer to the pole itself, and the aurora can actually become less frequent overhead, often appearing instead along the horizon rather than directly above. It is a small, counterintuitive detail, the kind of thing that quietly reminds you that nature rarely follows the simplest assumption, that closer is not always better, that the center of something is not always where its most generous expression occurs. Sometimes, the richest version of an experience exists not at the extreme, but somewhere gently nearby it, in the space just around the edges. Pilots flying long polar routes between North America and Asia occasionally report extraordinary views of the aurora from cruising altitude, far above the clouds and city lights that usually interfere with viewing from the ground. At 35,000 feet, with the cabin lights dimmed for an overnight flight, passengers who happen to glance out their window during certain winter months have described entire skies filled with shifting green light, stretching farther than they could from any single point on Earth. Some pilots have even adjusted flight paths slightly, when safely possible, to give passengers a better view of a particularly active display, treating it as a quiet, unplanned gift for everyone aboard, the entire cabin gathering at the windows in hushed appreciation. There is something tender about strangers packed into a metal tube 35,000 feet above the earth, all falling silent together to watch the same shifting light. For just a few minutes, the usual business of travel, the schedules and worries and cramped seats, simply fades away, replaced by something far older and far quieter than any of it. The duration of total darkness plays an enormous role in how often a place experiences visible auroras, which is why far northern regions, despite their long winters, also enjoy some of the best viewing windows of the year, specifically because of how much darkness surrounds each day. In places like Svalbard, deep within the Arctic Circle, the sun may not rise above the horizon for nearly 4 months during the depths of winter, an extended darkness locals have learned to live within rather than resist. Far from being something purely difficult to endure, many residents describe a particular quiet beauty to the polar night, candlelit afternoons, slow gatherings indoors, and frequent opportunities, almost any hour of the day, to step outside and check whether the aurora has decided to appear. There is a kind of peace, it seems, in surrendering fully to darkness rather than resisting it, treating the absence of daylight not as a loss, but simply as an invitation to notice other, softer forms of light instead. While the green and red auroras are the most commonly described, an extremely rare form known as a black aurora occasionally appears, manifesting not as light, but as dark, swirling patches within an otherwise glowing display, almost like gaps or holes torn into the curtain of color. Scientists believe these dark patches occur in regions where electrons are actually flowing upward, away from the Earth, rather than downward into the atmosphere, creating an absence of light rather than a presence of it, a kind of negative space within the aurora itself. It is a strange and quiet thought that even within something defined entirely by light, there can be pockets of true darkness, equally fascinating, equally deliberate, simply less visible to the casual observer. Perhaps that says something gentle about most things in life, that even within the brightest, most wondrous moments, there is often a little darkness woven through it too, not as a flaw, but simply as part of how the whole picture comes together. Modern aurora forecasting relies heavily on satellites positioned roughly 1 million miles from Earth at a gravitationally stable point called Lagrange Point 1, where the pull of the Sun and the pull of the Earth balance each other out, allowing a spacecraft to sit nearly still relative to both. These satellites watch the solar wind as it streams past, giving scientists anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour of advance warning before a surge of particles reaches our planet and potentially ignites a brighter display. 15 minutes might not sound like much warning, but for an aurora chaser standing in freezing temperatures, it can mean the difference between catching the brightest moment of the night or missing it entirely while looking the wrong direction. There is something almost touching about an entire chain of distant machinery sitting silently 1 million miles away, simply so that a small handful of patient, cold, hopeful people on a hillside somewhere can have just enough notice to lift their eyes at exactly the right moment. In Greenland, some older traditions describe the aurora as the spirits of children who died at birth, dancing joyfully across the sky, their light a gentle, hopeful image rather than something frightening or ominous. Other versions of the story describe the lights as the spirits of the dead in general, playing games much like the ones they enjoyed in life, their laughter and movement causing the colors to ripple and shift above the heads of the living. These stories, gentle and warm despite touching on loss, offer a softer way of understanding both grief and the unknown, transforming something difficult into something beautiful and ongoing, rather than something simply ended. There is comfort in that kind of storytelling, the idea that those we've lost might still be moving somewhere, still playing, still present in some quiet, shimmering way above us, even if we can no longer reach them directly. Whether or not the lights are anything more than charged particles and magnetic fields, there is nothing wrong with also letting them be something softer, something comforting, something gently human. Auroras have been observed on Earth for far longer than recorded history. Evidence suggests ancient cave paintings in France, dating back possibly 17,000 years, may include some of the earliest known depictions of the lights, faint wavy lines and color patterns that some researchers believe were inspired by skies our distant ancestors once watched in wonder, long before written language existed to describe what they were seeing. If true, this means humans have been quietly looking up at this exact phenomenon for longer than most of civilization has existed, longer than cities, longer than writing, longer than nearly everything we consider part of human history. Generation after generation in caves and tents and small wooden homes, people paused what they were doing, stepped outside into the cold, and simply watched the sky shift color above them, just as you might be imagining now, eyes closed, picturing soft, green light drifting slowly across the dark. There is a particular stillness that settles over the body when watching the aurora for an extended time, something aurora chasers often describe almost as a form of meditation. Standing in deep cold, wrapped in layers with nothing to do but wait and watch, the mind tends to slow down considerably. Thoughts drifting more loosely than usual, attention settling fully into the present moment, because there is, quite simply, nothing else demanding it. Some describe losing track of time entirely, certain that only 20 minutes had passed when, in reality, 2 or 3 hours had quietly slipped by while they stood transfixed, watching colours shift and fold above them. It is one of the few experiences left that asks nothing of us except patience and attention. No screen, no sound, no urgency. Only the slow unfolding of light, asking only that we stay still long enough to notice it fully. Perhaps that is part of why people travel so far and wait so long and endure such bitter cold, simply for the rare chance to feel that kind of stillness again, if only for a single night. As your eyes grow heavier now, picture this scene settling over you gently, the way snow settles without sound over a quiet field. You are standing somewhere very cold, very still, your breath rising softly in front of you. Above you, the sky has gone fully dark, scattered with more stars than you've ever taken the time to count. And slowly, almost shyly at first, a pale green light begins to gather along the horizon. It grows, stretching gently upward, swaying as if caught in some slow and silent wind. There is no rush to it, no urgency, only a soft, patient unfolding, color drifting into color, light folding into light. You do not need to understand the solar wind or the magnetic field or the names of distant gases glowing far above you. You only need to let your eyes close and let the colors move quietly behind them, green fading softly into rose, rose fading gently into the deepest, most restful blue. Somewhere above the Arctic tonight, the lights are still drifting, slow and patient as ever. And you, wrapped in warmth and stillness, can simply let them carry you, gently, all the way into sleep. The aurora forms in a layer of the atmosphere called the thermosphere, a place so thin and so high that the air there barely qualifies as air at all. And yet it is dense enough just barely to let charged particles spark into color when they pass through it. Oxygen atoms take a strange, lingering amount of time to release their light once struck by a charged particle, sometimes up to 2 minutes, which is part of why the green aurora seems to drift and fade so slowly, rather than flashing and disappearing all at once. The aurora has a quieter cousin called airglow, a very faint light that exists in the upper atmosphere every single night, all over the planet, whether or not any solar activity is happening at all, too dim for human eyes, but always softly present like a pilot light left burning behind the dark. Some of the most powerful auroras in recorded history occurred in 1859, 1872, and 1821. 3 separate solar storms strong enough to be seen far outside the Arctic, each one a brief reminder of just how far the sun's reach can extend. A single auroral substorm can release roughly the same amount of energy as a magnitude 5.5 earthquake, and yet it arrives above us not as a tremor, but as something soft enough to fall asleep beneath. The Cree people of North America sometimes referred to the aurora as the dance of the spirits, believing it represented loved ones who had passed on, still moving, still present, simply somewhere just beyond reach. On a particularly active night, the aurora can appear to pulse, brightening and dimming every 10 to 20 seconds in a steady rhythm, almost like a slow and distant heartbeat written across the sky. Auroras can occasionally form a complete ring around the magnetic pole, visible all at once from space as a glowing halo, though from the ground, we only ever see a small slice of that enormous circle drifting somewhere above our heads. The lights are sometimes called the Merry Dancers in parts of Scotland, where on clear winter nights faint auroras can occasionally be seen from the northernmost coasts, a soft pale shimmer mistaken by some for distant fireworks. A coronal hole, a cooler, darker patch on the sun's surface, can send out a steady stream of solar wind for days at a time, sometimes producing gentle, long-lasting auroras rather than the brief, dramatic bursts caused by solar flares. In Japan, some couples once believed that a child conceived beneath the northern lights would be blessed with good fortune, leading a small number of hopeful travelers to journey north each winter, simply for the chance. The lights can occasionally appear in shades of pale yellow or faint white, a blending of red and green light so subtle that the human eye struggles to separate the colors apart, reading them instead as something softer, paler, harder to name. Aurora forecasting apps use real-time satellite data to estimate viewing odds an hour or more in advance, allowing modern chasers to wait indoors, warm and unhurried, until just the right moment to step outside. The shape of an aurora is shaped partly by the lines of Earth's magnetic field itself, which is why displays so often appear as long, curtain-like folds rather than scattered patches, the particles tracing invisible lines drawn quietly through the sky. Some long-exposure photographs of the aurora reveal faint structures invisible to the naked eye entirely, delicate threads and ripples only the patient lens of a camera can fully draw out from the dark. The further north you travel generally, the more often the lights appear overhead rather than near the horizon, simply because you are moving closer to the heart of the auroral oval itself. A particularly strong solar storm in 1859 caused auroras so bright that some witnesses reported being able to read a newspaper outdoors at midnight by their light alone. The Norse believed the aurora might be reflections from the shields and armor of fallen warriors, the Valkyries riding across the sky as they carried souls toward the afterlife. Aurora displays often intensify in the hours surrounding local magnetic midnight, a specific point in the night, tied not to the clock, but to your position relative to Earth's magnetic field. The lights have inspired countless place names across the Arctic, with several towns and lodges in Scandinavia and Canada built specifically around the promise of a clear view on a good night. Auroras at very high altitudes, the rarer reds occur because oxygen atoms there are spread so thinly that it takes far longer for them to collide and release their light, drawing the color out into something soft and lingering. Some sailors of old believed a visible aurora meant calmer seas were coming, treating the lights as a quiet promise that safer waters lay just ahead. In Estonia, an old folk belief held that the lights were great battles being fought in the sky by otherworldly beings, their swords and shields catching reflected starlight as they clashed silently above the clouds. The total energy released by Earth's auroras during a single large geomagnetic storm could power a moderately sized country for several days, were there any way to capture it. A faint type of aurora called diffuse aurora spreads gently and evenly across large areas of sky without forming clear shapes, more like a soft haze of color than a defined curtain or band. Researchers have found that auroras can sometimes be triggered not just by solar storms, but by sudden compressions in Earth's magnetic field caused by fast-moving streams within the otherwise steady solar wind. The phrase "northern lights" was first used in English texts as early as the 1700s, slowly replacing older, more regional names as scientific interest in the phenomenon began to spread. Some auroras display a faint flickering quality, almost like a candle catching a draft, caused by rapid fluctuations in the stream of particles entering the atmosphere at any given moment. The Yupik people of Alaska traditionally told children to come inside when the aurora grew especially bright, believing the spirits above might be more likely to notice and perhaps reach down toward those still outside. Auroral displays on Earth can sometimes be mirrored almost exactly in the opposite hemisphere at the very same moment, the northern and southern lights occasionally dancing in matching patterns thousands of miles apart. A model aurora can be recreated in laboratory conditions using vacuum chambers and small amounts of gas struck with controlled currents, producing a tiny, contained glow, not unlike the real thing far above us. The brightness of an aurora is sometimes measured on a scale of 0 to 4, called the International Brightness Coefficient, with the faintest barely visible and the brightest casting a visible glow against the snow below. In parts of Siberia, some indigenous groups believed whistling beneath an active aurora could summon it closer, while others believed the opposite, that whistling might offend the spirits and cause the lights to vanish entirely. Aurora chasers sometimes wait in temperatures well below freezing for 4 or 5 hours at a stretch, describing the long, cold wait itself as part of what makes the eventual sight feel so deeply earned. The lights occasionally take on a corona shape, where the rays appear to radiate outward from a single point directly overhead, an effect caused simply by perspective, the curtain folding away from the viewer in every direction at once. Some Arctic explorers in the 19th century kept detailed personal journals describing the aurora purely for their own comfort, finding the nightly ritual of watching and recording the lights a steadying presence during long, isolating expeditions. A weak, slow-moving solar wind can still occasionally produce auroras, though these tend to be fainter, more diffuse, and confined closer to the poles than the dramatic displays caused by faster solar storms. The Cherokee told stories of a great fire burning at the edge of the world, its glow reaching up into the northern sky on certain nights, faint and distant, a gentle warmth too far away to ever truly feel. Modern satellites have allowed scientists to observe the aurora not just from below, but from directly above, capturing full images of the glowing oval wrapped around the pole as a single, continuous ring of light. Some of the calmest, most consistent auroras occur not during the most dramatic solar storms, but during quiet, steady periods of moderate solar wind, gentle enough to produce a soft, lasting glow rather than a brief, dramatic flare. A particularly memorable display in 1958 was visible as far south as Mexico, surprising observers who had never expected to see anything like it so far from the Arctic. Many Arctic lodges built specifically for aurora viewing include glass-domed ceilings above the beds, allowing guests to watch the sky shift color from the warmth and comfort of their pillow. The collision between a charged particle and an atom that produces the aurora happens in a fraction of a second, even though the visible result can linger and drift for minutes afterward. Old Norwegian sailors sometimes referred to a particularly still and golden aurora as a sign of good fishing weather to come, tying the lights gently into the practical rhythms of their daily lives. The Northern Lights have appeared in early Chinese astronomical records dating back over 2,000 years, described then as a kind of celestial dragon, breathing soft color into the night sky. A strong aurora can sometimes interfere gently with radio signals and GPS accuracy, a quiet reminder that something so beautiful above us can also, in its own way, nudge at the edges of our modern technology. The shape of an auroral curtain can stretch for hundreds of miles across the sky while remaining only a few hundred feet thick, a vast, impossibly thin sheet of light suspended high above the clouds. Some early scientists believed the aurora was caused by sunlight reflecting off polar ice and clouds, a theory that persisted for decades before the true relationship with solar particles and magnetism was finally understood. In Iceland, certain old beliefs held that pregnant women should avoid looking directly at the aurora, fearing it might affect the child, while others felt the opposite, that the lights brought only quiet blessings. A coronal mass ejection traveling at its fastest recorded speeds can reach Earth in under 18 hours, compressing what is normally a multi-day journey into a single restless night. The lights occasionally form a spiral shape during very active substorms, slowly curling and rotating like smoke caught in a gentle unseen current high above the ground. Aurora-related tourism has grown steadily in northern Norway, Finland and Iceland over recent decades, with entire small economies now built quietly around clear winter skies and patient, hopeful travelers. The deep red auroras, rarest of all, are sometimes called stable auroral red arcs, and tend to appear during particularly intense geomagnetic storms, lingering steadily rather than rippling or shifting quickly. Some Arctic communities once used the appearance of the aurora as an informal calendar marker, associating particularly active winters with stories and songs passed down for the following generations. A clear, moonless night dramatically improves aurora visibility, since even a bright moon can wash out the fainter greens and blues the way streetlights wash out the stars in a city sky. The lights are occasionally visible from commercial flights, even during summer months at very high latitudes, when brief windows of true darkness still allow faint auroras to appear against a barely dimmed sky. Researchers studying ancient ice cores in Greenland have found chemical traces left behind by ancient solar storms, allowing scientists to estimate auroral activity from thousands of years before anyone wrote a single word about it. A particularly vivid aurora was recorded during the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, with several survivors later recalling faint, colored light shimmering above the dark, freezing water. The lights can sometimes be seen reflected on the surface of still Arctic lakes, doubling the display, one curtain rippling gently above, another rippling just as gently below. Some Sami Joik songs, an old form of vocal music passed down through generations, were composed specifically to honor or describe the feeling of watching the aurora unfold slowly overhead. A particularly active aurora can sometimes be mistaken at first glance for distant wildfire smoke lit by moonlight, until the color begins to shift and move in ways no smoke ever could. The solar wind that fuels the aurora travels at speeds between 200 and 800 kilometers per second, fast enough to cross the entire width of the continental United States in under 10 seconds. Some long winter expeditions to Antarctica have reported auroras so bright they cast faint shadows across the snow, a soft, coloured light, delicate enough to notice only in complete and total darkness. In old Welsh folklore, faint auroras occasionally visible from northern coastlines were sometimes called the Heavenly Dance, thought to be a brief glimpse of joy carrying over from another world entirely. A geomagnetic storm strong enough to produce widespread auroras is typically preceded by a sudden, sharp increase in Earth's magnetic field, detectable by ground stations hours before the lights themselves appear. The northern lights have occasionally been captured glowing softly behind erupting volcanoes in Iceland, two entirely different forces of nature, sharing the same dark sky for a few rare, striking minutes. Some older Inuit elders described a particular quiet courtesy toward the aurora, speaking softly or not at all while it moved overhead, treating the moment with the same hush one might offer a sleeping child. A weak aurora can sometimes be enhanced in photographs using slightly longer exposure times, gently revealing color and structure the human eye alone would have missed entirely in the dark. The lights occasionally form what scientists call auroral beads, a row of small, evenly spaced bright spots strung gently along the edge of an otherwise calm curtain of light. Several historical shipwrecks in Arctic waters include final journal entries describing the aurora, sailors finding a small, strange comfort in watching the sky shift color, even as their situation grew dire. A truly dark sky, far from any city, allows the human eye roughly 20 to 30 minutes to fully adjust before faint auroras become easy to distinguish from drifting cloud. The phenomenon known as auroral, flickering, rapid pulses of brightness lasting less than a second, can sometimes be detected by sensitive cameras even when invisible to the unaided eye. Early telegraph operators in the 1800s sometimes noticed their equipment behaving strangely hours before a visible aurora appeared, an early and unintentional form of space weather forecasting. The lights have occasionally been reported glowing faintly above the deserts of the American Southwest during only the most extreme solar storms in recorded history, a strange and brief meeting of two very different landscapes. Some modern researchers use citizen photographs submitted from around the world to help track and confirm unusual auroral phenomena, like Steve, relying on ordinary, curious people as informal scientific collaborators. A quiet, steady green arc, low on the horizon, is often the very first sign that an aurora may strengthen later in the night, a gentle preview easy to overlook if you aren't paying close attention. The northern lights are sometimes visible from cruise ships traveling through Arctic waters, passengers gathering quietly on open decks, wrapped in blankets provided by the crew specifically for this purpose. Certain old Mongolian legends describe the aurora as a heavenly gate opening briefly each winter, allowing a soft light from beyond to spill gently down toward the frozen earth. A coronal mass ejection that narrowly missed Earth in 2012 was later estimated by scientists to have been comparable in strength to the Carrington event of 1859, a quiet, near-miss few people ever heard about. The lights occasionally produce a faint glow, visible even through the thin cloud cover, a soft, diffused colour bleeding gently through the haze rather than disappearing entirely. Some Arctic researchers describe long winters spent at remote stations where the nightly aurora became less an event and more a quiet, familiar companion, simply part of the rhythm of each passing evening. A particularly strong auroral substorm can move across the sky at speeds exceeding 1 kilometer per second, fast enough that an entire curtain of light can shift its shape within the span of a single breath. Old Dutch sailors exploring the Arctic in the 16th century left behind some of the earliest European written descriptions of the lights, describing them with a mixture of fear, awe, and careful, detailed observation. The lights are occasionally visible from very high mountain peaks, even at lower latitudes where the thinner atmosphere and added elevation offer a slightly better chance during the strongest of solar storms. A faint type of red aurora, occurring at extremely high altitude, sometimes appears so dim that it can only be confirmed using specialized cameras rather than the naked human eye alone. Several long-running citizen science projects now invite amateur stargazers to log nightly aurora sightings, slowly building detailed records that help researchers understand long-term patterns in solar activity. The lights have occasionally synchronized in brief moments with unusually strong displays of shooting stars, two entirely unrelated phenomena sharing the same patient, dark sky by simple coincidence. Some far northern schools build short winter breaks or evening activities specifically around aurora forecasts, giving children the rare chance to watch the lights together as a quiet, shared community event. A particularly strong storm in 1872 caused auroras bright enough to be seen and documented across nearly every continent on Earth within the very same week. The lights have been described by some witnesses as appearing to breathe, slowly brightening and dimming in a steady rhythm that almost mirrors the quiet rise and fall of a sleeping chest. A small number of dedicated photographers spend entire winters living in remote Arctic cabins, waiting patiently through long stretches of cloud and stillness for just a handful of truly clear, active nights. The Maori of New Zealand have their own traditions surrounding the Southern Lights, sometimes describing them as the reflected fires of distant ancestors still burning quietly somewhere far to the south. A faint, rarely seen violet aurora can occur when nitrogen molecules are struck at very specific altitudes, producing a soft, fleeting color that few patient watchers ever happen to witness firsthand. Some Arctic guides recommend lying down directly on the snow rather than standing, allowing the entire sky to fill your vision completely, the cold ground beneath you the only price for such an unobstructed view. A weak solar wind stream can sometimes still trigger a localized, gentle aurora confined to a very narrow band, more like a soft brush stroke across the sky than a full, sweeping curtain. The Northern Lights remain even now only partially understood, with researchers still studying the fine details of how exactly certain shapes, colors, and rare phenomena, like Steve, actually form. Some long Arctic nights offer windows of complete stillness between auroral substorms, a quiet, patient pause where the sky simply rests, dark and starlit, before deciding to move again. A handful of remote glass igloos and cabins built specifically for aurora viewing now dot the far north, offering travelers the rare comfort of watching the lights shift color without ever stepping out into the cold. The lights have inspired countless quiet poems, songs, and paintings across centuries and cultures, each one a small, imperfect attempt to hold on to something that only ever truly exists for a few drifting minutes at a time. And somewhere above the Arctic tonight, long after this list has ended, the lights are still moving, slow and patient as ever, asking nothing of anyone except a little stillness, a little patience, and a willingness to simply look up and let the soft green light carry your thoughts gently toward sleep. The aurora is technically classified as a form of luminescence, the same broad category of light that includes fireflies and glow-in-the-dark stars, simply produced on a scale large enough to stretch across an entire sky. A single charged particle from the sun is roughly the size of a proton, far too small to ever see, and yet billions of them arriving together are enough to paint an entire horizon in soft, drifting color. The Pawnee people told stories of great chiefs and warriors building fires in the sky after death, the aurora simply the smoke and embers of those distant, eternal flames still quietly burning. A faint aurora can sometimes be mistaken for the glow of a far-off town until a patient watcher notices the light gently rippling, something no street lamp has ever done. The fastest recorded solar wind speeds during the strongest storms can exceed 3,000 kilometers per second, fast enough to make the usual multi-day journey to Earth in under a single day. In Latvia, an old belief held that the lights were the souls of unmarried women dancing gently in the sky because they had not yet found their place among the living. Auroras often appear most active in the hours just before midnight, when a particular region of Earth's magnetic tail, stretched out behind the planet like a long, invisible ribbon, releases stored energy back toward the poles. A weak, quiet aurora can sometimes linger for an entire night without ever brightening, simply holding steady, soft and pale, like a candle left burning low in another room. The Northern Lights have occasionally been photographed alongside the Milky Way, two enormous, ancient sources of light, sharing the same dark canvas for one brief, quiet exposure. Some Norwegian grandmothers traditionally told children that the lights were so bright because the spirits above were playing with a ball made of a walrus skull, tossing it gently from one to another. A particularly strong aurora can sometimes be seen glowing faintly, even through a thin layer of fog, the color softened and blurred, like a lamp seen through a sheet of falling snow. The lights occasionally appear to ripple outward from a single bright point, an effect scientists call an auroral surge, where particles rush briefly toward one small region before spreading outward again. Early Arctic explorers sometimes describe the cold itself as feeling different beneath an active aurora, though scientists have found no evidence the lights affect ground temperature at all. Perhaps it was simply the stillness and the wonder, making the cold feel softer somehow. A coronal mass ejection can contain billions of tons of solar material flung outward into space at enormous speed, only a tiny fraction of which ever reaches Earth's magnetic field at all. The Salish peoples of the Pacific Northwest sometimes referred to the aurora as the dance of the dead, similar to traditions found much further north, a quiet thread connecting cultures separated by enormous distance. Some long winter nights in the high Arctic offer what locals simply call aurora weather, a particular kind of clear, cold, still air that experienced watchers learn to recognize almost by instinct. A faint green aurora and a faint cloud can look remarkably similar from a distance, the easiest way to tell them apart being patience. Clouds drift steadily in one direction, while the aurora seems to breathe, brightening and softening in place. The lights have occasionally appeared during major eclipses, an already darkened sky offering an unexpected and rare second show for those lucky enough to be watching in just the right place. Some Greenlandic hunters once believed that whistling softly beneath the aurora could invite good luck on the next day's hunt, treating the lights as a quiet, hopeful blessing rather than something to fear. Fact 20. A particularly active substorm can cause the aurora to brighten so suddenly that experienced photographers describe needing to adjust their camera settings multiple times within just a few minutes. The upper edge of the aurora sometimes fades into a faint, ghostly violet, the very last whisper of color, before the display gives way entirely to the blackness of space above it. Some old Finnish hunters believed a particularly bright foxfire night meant the snow would be especially good for tracking the following morning, weaving the lights gently into the practical rhythms of daily survival. The northern lights can sometimes be detected very faintly, using nothing more than a smartphone camera held steady in true darkness, technology slowly catching up to something human eyes have wondered at for millennia. A particularly large geomagnetic storm in 1892 reportedly caused brief telegraph disruptions across parts of Europe, alongside vivid auroras described in newspapers as among the most beautiful in living memory. The lights occasionally form what scientists call a auroral crown, a circular radiating pattern that appears directly overhead, caused entirely by the curtain, folding away from the viewer in every direction at once. Some modern aurora tours include thermal sleeping bags laid out directly on the snow, allowing travelers to lie back comfortably for hours, watching the sky shift color without ever feeling the full bite of the cold. A faint, steady arc of light low on the horizon, often green or pale white, is sometimes the only sign of an aurora that never strengthens further, content simply to glow quietly until dawn approaches. The word borealis has been used in scientific literature for over 300 years, long outlasting many of the early theories about what actually caused the lights to appear. Some sailors crossing far northern waters in old wooden ships described keeping watch through the night simply to see the aurora, treating it as a welcome distraction from the long, slow boredom of ocean travel. A particularly strong solar storm can sometimes cause faint auroras to appear, even during the final hours of evening twilight, the color blending gently with the last, soft traces of daylight. The Ainu people of northern Japan held quiet respect for the lights, believing they carried messages from ancestors, though sightings at their latitude were rare enough to feel like genuine, treasured events. A truly dark, moonless sky combined with low solar wind speed often produces some of the faintest, most delicate auroras, easy to miss entirely unless a patient watcher has already let their eyes adjust fully. The lights occasionally form thin, parallel bands stacked one above another, like several quiet ribbons laid gently across the sky at slightly different heights. Some early 20th century postcards from Norway and Alaska featured hand-painted depictions of the aurora, often more vivid and saturated than anything travelers could capture with the simple cameras of the time. A faint type of red aurora occurring at the very highest altitudes is sometimes called the proton aurora, caused by protons rather than electrons colliding with the upper atmosphere. The lights have occasionally been described by witnesses as having a faint, sweet smell, though scientists generally attribute this to cold, clean Arctic air itself rather than the aurora producing any scent of its own. Some Siberian shamanic traditions describe the lights as a passage between worlds, used briefly each winter by spirits traveling between the realm of the living and the realm beyond it. A coronal mass ejection that strikes Earth directly rather than glancing past it tends to produce far stronger and more widespread auroras than one that only grazes the edge of our planet's magnetic field. The lights occasionally appear to flicker rapidly along their lower edge while remaining calm and steady higher up, two very different rhythms playing out within the very same curtain of color. Some Arctic researchers describe long stretches of cloudy winter where the aurora is known to be active overhead, yet completely hidden. A quiet reminder that wonder doesn't require witnesses to keep occurring. A particularly vivid aurora season in 2015, tied to heightened solar activity, drew record numbers of travelers to northern Norway and Iceland, many waiting patiently for nights on end for just one clear viewing. The lights have occasionally been mistaken, especially by first-time visitors, for distant city glow until the color begins to shift in ways no artificial light source ever could. Some old Icelandic sagas mention strange lights in the northern sky, described in passing rather than explained, simply accepted as part of the landscape, the way mountains or fjords might be. A faint, broad band of diffuse aurora can sometimes stretch across nearly the entire sky at once, softer and less defined than the more dramatic curtains, like a gentle wash of color rather than a sharp brushstroke. The northern lights have occasionally appeared during quiet New Year's celebrations across the Arctic, locals stepping outside between toasts, simply to check whether the sky might be putting on its own quiet show. Some long Arctic expeditions in the early 20th century used auroral position as a rough, informal aid in determining direction, long before more precise instruments became common practice. A particularly strong storm can sometimes cause the aurora to appear simultaneously in two separate bands, one closer to the pole and one farther out, briefly doubling the display across the sky. The lights occasionally take on a soft lavender hue, where red and blue light overlap faintly along certain edges, a delicate color rarely captured clearly except in long exposure photography. Some Sami reindeer herders historically timed certain winter movements loosely around auroral activity, treating particularly bright nights as good occasions for traveling safely across open, snow-covered ground. A quiet aurora, barely visible to the eye, can sometimes still register clearly on a phone camera's night mode, technology occasionally seeing more than our own eyes are able to in the dark. The lights have inspired more than one entire genre of slow ambient music, composers attempting to capture in sound the same unhurried, drifting quality the aurora carries across the sky. Some early Arctic missionaries recorded local legends about the lights specifically to preserve them, unintentionally creating some of the only written records of stories that might otherwise have faded entirely. A particularly strong substorm can cause the aurora to expand suddenly across a much wider stretch of sky within just a few minutes, a process scientists still work to fully predict in advance. The lights occasionally appear to pause entirely mid-display, holding still for several long minutes before resuming their slow drift, almost as if catching a quiet breath. Some northern Canadian communities hold informal evening gatherings during periods of strong, forecasted activity, neighbors stepping outside together rather than watching alone. A coronal hole stream, gentler than a full solar flare, can still produce several consecutive nights of soft, steady auroral activity rather than the single dramatic burst caused by more violent solar events. The northern lights have occasionally been visible from the decks of icebreaker ships navigating polar waters, the glowing sky reflected faintly across the surrounding ice. Some old Russian folk tales describe the lights as firebirds soaring across the night sky, their feathers trailing brilliant color behind them as they passed. A faint aurora is sometimes easier to notice using peripheral vision rather than looking directly at it, since the edges of human eyesight are more sensitive to dim light in the dark. The lights occasionally synchronize loosely with the slow pulse of the solar wind itself, brightening gently every few minutes in a rhythm tied directly to subtle shifts arriving from millions of miles away. Some modern researchers use ground-based all-sky cameras positioned across the Arctic to continuously photograph the entire sky every few seconds, quietly building a long-term record of auroral behavior. A particularly active aurora season can sometimes overlap with the peak of winter darkness, offering unusually long stretches of perfect viewing conditions for those willing to brave the cold. The lights have occasionally been described by children upon seeing them for the first time as the sky breathing, an observation that often turns out to be remarkably close to how scientists describe the pulsing aurora themselves. Some early Arctic photographers in the 1890s experimented with long, uncomfortable exposures lasting several minutes, hoping to capture even a faint trace of the lights, using the limited cameras available at the time. A faint auroral glow can occasionally be detected using specialized instruments even during full daylight hours, though it remains completely invisible to the unaided human eye under bright skies. The lights occasionally appear to ripple in waves that travel steadily from west to east across the sky, a slow procession of color drifting gently along, unhurried, toward the coming dawn. Some Norwegian coastal towns hold small winter festivals loosely centered around the aurora season, locals and visitors gathering for warm food and quiet conversation while waiting for the sky to perform. A particularly strong storm can sometimes cause faint auroral activity, even at the equator, though such events are exceedingly rare and have occurred only a handful of times in recorded history. The Northern Lights have occasionally been described in old Inuit stories as a narrow path lit specifically to guide the souls of the newly departed safely toward the next world. A quiet, steady aurora lasting several hours without much change is sometimes simply called a calm night by experienced chasers content with soft, reliable color rather than dramatic, shifting movement. Some long Arctic train routes through northern Scandinavia occasionally pause briefly during exceptionally strong displays, allowing passengers a few quiet minutes to step outside and watch before continuing on. The lights occasionally produce faint shadows on freshly fallen snow during the brightest displays, a phenomenon so subtle it requires near total darkness and very still eyes to notice at all. Some old Scottish fishing communities referred to a faint aurora seen from the northern coast as the heavenly lights, treating any sighting, however rare, as a small and welcome blessing. A particularly strong geomagnetic storm in 2017 briefly pushed visible auroras as far south as the central United States, surprising many who had never expected to see anything like it from their own backyard. The lights occasionally fold into long, slow spirals during especially active substorms, curling gently like ribbon caught in the lightest possible breeze. Some Arctic biologists have studied whether auroral activity affects animal behavior, finding only subtle, inconclusive hints that certain birds may adjust their migration timing slightly during unusually active solar periods. A faint, pale aurora low on the horizon at dusk is sometimes mistaken for the last lingering light of sunset, the two blending together in a soft, easy confusion only time can fully resolve. The Northern Lights have appeared in early Babylonian astronomical records described cautiously as unusual atmospheric fires observed and noted long before anyone understood their true cause. Some experienced aurora photographers describe a particular quiet joy in capturing a display no one else happened to be present for, the image becoming, in a way, a private gift shared only with themselves. A faint, diffuse green glow stretching evenly across the entire sky without strong shape or structure is sometimes the very last stage of a fading aurora before the night settles back into stillness. Some long Arctic winters are remembered locally not by their temperature, but by how many good aurora nights they offered. A quiet, informal calendar built entirely around moments of light. A particularly strong coronal mass ejection can sometimes be tracked visually by solar observatories as it leaves the sun, scientists watching, in real time, the very beginning of a journey that won't end for another day or more. The lights occasionally appear to gather in soft, drifting pools of color rather than long curtains, especially during weaker, more diffuse displays late in the night. Some old Norwegian lullabies include gentle references to the aurora, soft, wordless melodies meant to calm children by drawing their attention upward, toward the slow, drifting light, rather than toward the dark itself. A faint aurora, glimpsed only once briefly through a gap in passing clouds, is sometimes remembered by witnesses more vividly than a long, clear display seen in full, simply for how fleeting and rare it felt. The lights occasionally appear paired with a faint halo around the moon on certain clear, cold nights. Two very different atmospheric phenomena, briefly sharing the same quiet sky. Some Arctic search and rescue teams have reported using auroral brightness as a rough, informal gauge of overall sky clarity when planning nighttime operations in remote areas. A particularly strong storm in 2024 briefly produced visible auroras across much of the continental United States, surprising many who had assumed such a sight was reserved only for the far north. The lights occasionally seem to slow down considerably in the final hour before dawn, the colors softening and stretching more gradually as the surrounding sky begins its own slow shift toward morning. Some old Welsh sailors described faint auroras as the sky's quiet farewell to winter, a final soft display before spring slowly began reclaiming the lengthening days. A faint, steady auroral arc that never strengthens or fades throughout an entire night is occasionally referred to by chasers as a patient sky, content simply to glow softly until morning without further movement. The northern lights have occasionally been observed gently rippling above frozen waterfalls in Iceland, two completely different forms of stillness and motion sharing the same quiet frame. Some long winter research stays in Antarctica include informal logs where scientists note auroral activity purely out of personal interest, separate entirely from their official scientific work. A faint green aurora low on the horizon at the very start of twilight is sometimes the earliest possible sign that a much stronger display may follow several hours later. The lights occasionally appear to gather thickest directly above small, remote Arctic settlements, though scientists attribute this mostly to the simple absence of competing light pollution rather than any deeper cause. Some old Hudson's Bay Company trading post journals from the 17 and 1800s include brief, almost offhand mentions of the aurora, noted alongside the weather as simply another detail of daily Arctic life. A particularly faint and patient aurora, barely brighter than the surrounding stars, can sometimes go completely unnoticed by anyone not specifically looking for it that night. The lights occasionally seem to gather and fold gently around the edges of passing clouds, the color bending softly to follow shapes already drifting quietly across the sky. Some modern science centers have built small planetarium-style auroral simulations, allowing visitors who may never travel north themselves to experience a small, gentle echo of the real thing. And somewhere above the Arctic tonight, far from any of these facts or stories, the lights continue their slow, unhurried drift, asking nothing more of you now than to let your eyes close, your breathing slow, and your thoughts settle quietly into the soft, fading green of sleep. The aurora is sometimes described by scientists as a kind of natural neon sign, the very same basic principle: electrons, exciting gas atoms into glowing, simply played out on a scale that stretches across an entire sky rather than a single tube of glass. A particularly patient form of aurora called a pulsating patch can flicker on and off every 10 to 15 seconds for hours at a time, soft and rhythmic, like a slow and distant lighthouse turning quietly in place. The Tlingit people of the Pacific Northwest sometimes described the lights as the spirits of warriors who had died bravely, granted a place in the sky to continue their slow, eternal dance. A faint aurora seen for the very first time is often quietly underwhelming to first-time visitors who expect something closer to fireworks, only to discover that its real beauty lies in its slowness, not its speed. The solar wind that eventually becomes the aurora begins as ordinary plasma boiling off the surface of the sun, escaping its gravity simply because the sun's corona is, strangely, far hotter than the surface itself. Some Norwegian fishermen once kept informal records linking unusually long auroral seasons with particularly mild winters that followed a folk pattern. Modern meteorologists have never been able to fully confirm or dismiss. A coronal mass ejection that arrives at a glancing angle rather than head-on can sometimes produce a longer, gentler aurora display, rather than one single, brief, dramatic burst. The lights occasionally appear to ripple in slow waves resembling water, an effect caused by shifting currents of particles moving unevenly along the same general curtain of light. Some old Danish sea charts from the Arctic include small handwritten notes about auroral sightings, left behind by sailors simply as a personal record, rather than for any official purpose. A faint violet fringe sometimes appears along the very bottom edge of a green aurora, caused by nitrogen molecules reacting at slightly lower altitudes than the oxygen above them. The Chukchi people of far northeastern Siberia traditionally associated the lights with the souls of those who died at sea, the gentle color, a quiet sign that they had found their way safely into the next world. Some long Arctic camping trips are planned entirely around the lunar calendar, travelers deliberately avoiding the full moon, when its brightness can quietly wash out all but the strongest auroral displays. A particularly strong substorm can sometimes brighten the entire sky within seconds, experienced watchers describing the shift as feeling almost like someone slowly turning up a dimmer switch overhead. The lights have occasionally been reported alongside unusually vivid sunsets on the very same evening, the sky offering two entirely different forms of color within the span of just a few hours. Some Sami storytellers describe the aurora as the breath of a great reindeer running silently across the sky, each exhale leaving behind a soft trail of shifting color. A faint aurora can sometimes be confirmed using a simple trick, holding very still and watching for several minutes. True aurora will shift and breathe, while drifting cloud generally maintains a steadier, less alive kind of movement. The northern lights have appeared faintly in old ship logs from English trading vessels as early as the 1500s, described cautiously as strange fires burning low along the northern horizon. Some particularly strong displays cause a faint secondary glow to appear opposite the main aurora, low on the southern horizon, an effect scientists still don't fully understand the mechanics of. A slow-moving coronal hole stream can sometimes produce auroras lasting several consecutive nights in a row, rather than the single sharp burst more typical of a fast solar flare. The lights occasionally form narrow, twisting bands that scientists describe as auroral streamers, thin ribbons peeling gently away from the main curtain, before fading quietly back into the dark. Some early Arctic missionaries noted that local communities rarely expressed fear of the aurora directly, instead treating it with a kind of quiet, practiced familiarity built from a lifetime of simply living beneath it. A faint aurora glimpsed through a thin gap in passing clouds can sometimes disappear entirely within seconds, gone before a camera can even be readied, existing only in the brief memory of whoever happened to glance up at exactly the right moment. The lights have occasionally synchronized loosely with sudden compressions in Earth's magnetosphere caused by fast-moving gusts within an otherwise steady solar wind, brightening suddenly without any major flare involved at all. Some old Icelandic farmers traditionally welcomed a bright auroral season as a quiet sign of good fortune for the coming year, weaving the lights gently into broader seasonal beliefs about luck and harvest. A particularly faint aurora sometimes appears only as a subtle greyish tint along the horizon, easy to dismiss entirely, until a long exposure photograph reveals the soft green hiding within it. The northern lights have occasionally been visible from high-altitude weather balloons, capturing images of the curtain stretching out beneath a layer of thin, scattered cloud far below. Some Greenlandic communities once associated particularly active winters with abundant seal, hunting the following spring, tying the lights gently into long-standing seasonal traditions passed down through generations. A faint auroral glow sometimes appears briefly just before sunrise, a soft farewell color fading quietly into the very first hints of daylight, beginning to spread across the horizon. The lights occasionally form what scientists call auroral rays, tall, narrow columns of light stretching upward from the main curtain, like soft beams cast gently from some unseen source far above. Some old Russian Pomor fishermen living along the White Sea coast developed detailed, informal knowledge of auroral patterns passed down purely through oral tradition long before any formal scientific study reached the region. A particularly strong storm can occasionally cause the aurora to appear simultaneously in two slightly different colors at once, green below, faint red above, blending gently along the seam between them. The northern lights have occasionally been described by modern astronauts as one of the most striking sights visible from orbit, a soft, glowing ring wrapped gently around the curve of the entire planet. Some Arctic dog mushers describe particularly bright auroral nights as ideal for long, quiet travel across open snow, the soft, ambient light from above making the landscape just a little easier to navigate. A faint aurora scene reflected on still Arctic ice can sometimes appear nearly as vivid as the display itself, the frozen surface acting almost like a quiet, natural mirror laid flat across the land. Some old Sami beliefs held that children born during a particularly active aurora would grow up especially gentle and calm, the soft light above thought to leave a quiet, lasting impression. A particularly weak and steady aurora can sometimes remain nearly unchanged for several hours, content simply to hover softly along the horizon without ever building into anything more dramatic. The lights occasionally cast a faint-coloured tint across freshly fallen snow, a subtle wash of green or rose so soft it requires near total darkness and very patient eyes to notice clearly. Some early 20th century Arctic newspapers included regular auroral reports, much like modern weather columns, allowing local residents to simply check whether a display had occurred the previous night. A coronal mass ejection travelling directly toward Earth can sometimes be seen by solar observatories as a faint, expanding halo around the Sun itself, a quiet visual warning days before anything reaches our atmosphere. The northern lights have occasionally appeared softly behind the silhouette of grazing reindeer herds in Lapland, a quiet, almost dreamlike scene captured by patient wildlife photographers waiting through long, cold nights. Some old Inuit elders described particularly fast-moving auroras as a sign that strong winds were coming the following day, treating the sky's movement as a kind of gentle, early warning. A faint, steady arc of pale green that lingers without ever brightening is sometimes simply called a quiet night by aurora chasers, content to accept whatever soft display the sky has chosen to offer. The lights occasionally produce a faint flicker along their uppermost edge just before a substorm begins, an early, subtle sign experienced watchers learn to recognize after many patient nights of practice. Some Norwegian coastal lighthouses historically logged auroral sightings alongside their regular weather observations, treating the lights as simply another quiet detail worth recording each night. A particularly strong storm in 1941 briefly disrupted radio communications across parts of Scandinavia, while at the very same time producing some of the most vivid auroras recorded that entire decade. The lights occasionally form gentle, overlapping waves that drift slowly past one another, two separate currents of color briefly sharing the very same patch of sky. Some Arctic researchers studying long-term auroral patterns rely partly on old ship logs and diaries, piecing together centuries of informal observation long before satellites existed to confirm any of it. A faint aurora low on the horizon at dusk can sometimes be mistaken for the glow of a distant town just beginning to light its windows for the evening. The northern lights have occasionally been described by long-haul truck drivers crossing remote stretches of northern Canada and Alaska as a welcome, quiet companion during long, otherwise uneventful overnight drives. Some old Faroese sailors believed a particularly vivid aurora meant safe passage home was assured, treating the lights as a quiet, comforting promise during long winter voyages. A particularly weak solar wind can sometimes still produce a faint, narrow band of aurora, confined entirely to the very edge of the polar region, easy to overlook, unless a watcher happens to be looking in exactly the right direction. The lights occasionally appear to thicken and thin rhythmically along their length, almost like a slow, gentle breath traveling the full width of the curtain from one end to the other. Some early 20th century polar expedition photographs include faint, accidental captures of the aurora, visible only as a soft blur in the corner of frames, meant to document something else entirely. A faint, auroral glow sometimes lingers quietly behind thin cirrus clouds, the color softened and diffused, like candlelight glimpsed gently through a sheer curtain. The northern lights have occasionally been described in old Sami Yoik songs as a slow, wordless conversation between the sky and the land, each color a quiet phrase passed gently between them. Some particularly strong substorms cause the aurora to brighten so suddenly that experienced chasers describe an almost audible quality to the moment, even when no actual sound occurs at all. A faint, steady green arc occasionally remains visible even as thin clouds drift slowly past beneath it, the two layers moving at entirely different speeds across the same patch of sky. Some old Hudson Bay trading post records describe particularly long auroral seasons as good omens for trade, traders treating the lights as a quiet, informal sign of fortune for the season ahead. A particularly strong storm can sometimes produce faint secondary arcs stacked behind the brightest part of the display, each one slightly dimmer and farther back than the one before it. The lights occasionally seem to slow dramatically in the final stretch before dawn, the colors stretching and softening as though reluctant to let the night end completely. Some Arctic researchers describe a particular quiet camaraderie among long-term aurora watchers, strangers gathering wordlessly on cold hillsides, united simply by the shared decision to stay outside a little longer than most. A faint auroral arc seen very low on the northern horizon from more southern latitudes is sometimes the only hint, for those who live outside the Arctic, that a major solar storm is currently underway. The northern lights have occasionally appeared gently behind the silhouette of old wooden Arctic churches, a quiet, accidental pairing of two very different kinds of stillness. Some old Norwegian folk remedies suggested that simply spending time outside beneath an active aurora could ease restlessness or worry, treating the lights as a gentle, informal kind of comfort. A particularly weak aurora sometimes only becomes visible after several minutes of patient, careful looking, the eyes slowly learning to separate true color from the simple darkness surrounding it. The lights occasionally form long, gently curving arcs that stretch from one horizon entirely to the other, framing the whole sky like a soft, glowing bridge laid quietly across the night. Some Arctic wildlife photographers describe waiting through entire cloudy weeks for just one clear, active night, treating the eventual display as something earned through long, patient stillness. A particularly strong geomagnetic storm can occasionally cause minor, harmless static discharges in overhead power lines, a small, quiet reminder of just how much energy moves through the display above. The northern lights have occasionally been compared by witnesses to slow, silent fire, color rising and falling gently the way flames might, but without any heat, without any sound, without any danger at all. Some old Inuit stories describe the lights as a narrow trail used by spirits traveling swiftly between distant winter camps, the shifting color simply the dust kicked up gently along their path. A faint auroral glow occasionally lingers steadily for an entire night without ever fully fading, present quietly, even as the sky begins to lighten faintly toward morning. The lights occasionally appear paired softly with distant lightning from far-off storms, two very different forms of atmospheric light briefly sharing the very same dark horizon. Some Arctic hotels built specifically with aurora viewing in mind include quiet, wake-up call services, gently notifying guests the moment a display begins, even in the middle of the night. A particularly strong substorm can sometimes cause the aurora to appear to ripple from east to west and then reverse direction entirely within the very same display, a slow, shifting tide of color overhead. The northern lights have occasionally been described by long-distance hikers crossing remote Arctic trails as one of the few rewards for enduring such isolated, demanding conditions. And now, let your thoughts drift upward into the endless dark above. High above the frozen earth, where silence stretches from horizon to horizon, the sky begins to breathe. Curtains of green and violet fold and ripple across the heavens, not quite solid, not quite light, something older than either. For as long as people have lived beneath these skies, they have looked up at that slow, luminous dance and felt something loosen inside them. A quiet, a wonder, a reminder that the universe is alive. And still the lights move, just as they always have, long before there were eyes to witness them, long before there were words to hold them. You are part of that story now, one more soul who looked up and felt small and vast and strangely at peace. Rest now. Let the colors fade slowly behind your eyes, soft green, into darkness, darkness into sleep. Good night.